normative ideal document contents. One occurs when society determines who is considered human and who is not. This question lies at the core of the complex intersections between trans identity, disability, and survival within legal, medical, and social systems that often seek to categorize, regulate, and erase individuals. This essay examines how state power, institutional violence, and normative ideals of health and visibility influence who receives protection, recognition, or even the right to live. Drawing on the work of Jasper Puar, Cameron Awkwardridge, Mel White-Shen, and Hilma Latino-Char, I explore how trans and disabled bodies become sites of both hypervisibility and erasure. I also discuss how survival frequently requires strategies that resist assimilation or the notion of a cure. Historically and legally, trans identity and disability have often been perceived as distinct, even incompatible categories. The Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, of 1990 explicitly had to include specific exclusions of certain conditions to satisfy conservative senators. Transvestism, transsexualism, pedophilia, exhibitionism, voyeurism, gender identity disorders not resulting from physical impairments, or other sexual behavioral disorders. Awkwardridge, 55. This was not because trans identity was not seen as a disability, rather that, within the logic of 20th and 21st century law, the construction of both disability and transgender is uneven, even contradictory, but reveals their ongoing entanglement. Awkwardridge, 56. This legal separation, however, reinforced ableist assumptions that view disability as undesirable or illegitimate. Despite this legal separation, Awkwardridge emphasizes that trans identity remains thoroughly tethered to disability through medical frameworks such as the DSM's classification of dysphoria, which continues to pathologize trans experiences even as it claims to legitimize them. Jasper Puar critiques the limitations of intersectionality by arguing that it often separates identities into additive categories instead of examining the forces that shape bodies within systems of power. Using assemblage theory, she suggests a shift away from fixed identity categories toward understanding how biopolitical forces, such as medicine, law, and national security, relationally and contingency shape bodies, PR, becoming trans. In this perspective, transnormativity and the medicalization of transition can serve as both pathways to recognition and as mechanisms of discipline that reinforce able-bodied neoliberal ideals. The trans body that is rehabilitated through medical transition and legal recognition revolves around rehabilitation to multiple social norms. PR, becoming trans. 43. It necessitates altering one's gender presentation to conform to white, middle-class, able-bodied, heterosexual understandings of normative gender. This subject is productive and conforming, folded into state-sanctioned norms. Rather than challenging dominant systems, this body often represents their success, highlighting the complex ways in which survival is frequently navigated through compliance rather than resistance. Awkward, Rich, and Poor emphasize the deeply interconnected histories of marginalization experienced by trans and disabled bodies, shaped by violence, regulation, and spectacle. These bodies have been subjected to intense scrutiny, often displayed in freak shows, pathologized by medical institutions, and targeted by laws aimed at erasing or controlling their existence. As Poor points out, disability has historically served as a key trope of disqualification used to justify racism, sexism, and queerphobia. PR, disability, acting as a versatile tool for exclusion across various axes of identity. Both trans and disabled individuals have been portrayed as threats to social order, either rendered too visible or insufficiently visible, and denied full personhood through cultural and institutional mechanisms that determine who is regarded as human, valuable, or normal. Mel White-Shan's concept of everywhere archives broadens the idea of an archive beyond official institutions. It is framed as something created through digital means, viral content, embodied experiences, and emotional connections. For many transgender individuals, platforms like YouTube have provided essential spaces for self-definition and survival. These platforms allow for the flourishing of transition narratives, care strategies, and community connections outside the control of traditional institutions. The digital footprints left on these platforms serve as acts of resistance, documenting lives and identities often overlooked by formal records. However, Shan critiques the limitations of these spaces, pointing out that even in platforms that appear open to all, Asian bodies can be both invisible and yet spectacular, never, arguably, simply ordinary. Shan, Everywhere Archives, 200. This highlights how race, gender, and algorithmic bias intersect to perpetuate marginalization. While the Everywhere Archive possesses radical potential, it also reflects the unequal structures that surround it. Hilal Char's piece, Strategies of Passing, Hypervisible Bodies, Disrespectable Affinities, on Syrian trans refugees in Lebanon, on Syrian trans women in Lebanon, challenges Western ideas about transvisibility by emphasizing survival in the context of displacement, class stratification, and state violence. These women often face a difficult choice between respectable passing, which conforms to traditional gender and social expectations, and disrespectable passing, which involve forming alternative, often stigmatized networks of support. Shar explains that they engage in hedging, a strategy that includes ambiguity and code switching, enabling them to navigate changing dangers in surveillance. In this context, the concept of the trans closet goes beyond simple identity concealment. It represents the management of visibility as a critical life-or-death decision. Visibility, rather than being inherently liberating, becomes a resource that is distributed unevenly and often weaponized, influenced by factors such as race, class, and geopolitics. PR and Awkwardridge argue that separating trans identity from disability not only reinforces ableist norms but also weakens the political strength of both. By rejecting disability in the pursuit of legitimacy or recognition, trans politics can inadvertently support the same structures that marginalize non-normative bodies. Instead, both scholars advocate for a reimagined coalition, one that does not depend on neoliberal frameworks of recognition, productivity, or individual success. Instead, it should embrace shared vulnerability, interdependence, and resistance to systems that pathologize and control people, opening up space for messier, riskier, more transformative solidarities. In conclusion, the intersections of trans identity and disability reveal the limitations of frameworks rooted in legibility, productivity, and normativity. Rather than pursuing visibility or recognition on terms set by oppressive systems, the works of Puar, Awkwardridge, Shen, and Char call for a politics grounded in shared struggle and radical care.
What?
By confronting the ways institutions determine who is granted humanity, we open up possibilities for coalition and resistance that honor the full complexity of embodied life. Works cited Awkwardridge, Disabled History of Trans, CH1, passing, hypervisible bodies, disrespectable affinities, and Syrian trans refugees in Lebanon, sexualities, Shen, Ly, everywhere archives, transgendering, transasians, and the internet, Australian feminist studies, intoxicated method, unlearning, PR, Jasper K, bodies with new organs, becoming trans, becoming disabled, disability, transgender studies quarterly.
Is that it?